We're in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest on the interview series, Cordelia Calderon. She is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Medix. Cordelia, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Very happy to be here. Again, my name is Cordelia Calderon. My pronouns are she and hers. And for what I wanted to be when I grew up, I wanted to be in the WNBA. So loved basketball growing up. So definitely saw the movie Love and Basketball a million times. And that was always my goal, just to be a basketball star.
I love it. I love it. You fast forward to today. How has your personal journey really led you to be at Medix and the first Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion there as well?
Yeah, so I think my personal journey and how I got to be our first director of DEI here at Medix all definitely ties in together. I was born and raised in the Twin Cities, so St. Paul, Minneapolis. My dad has always worked for Habitat for Humanity. My mom is a teacher, poet, professor, and just amazing woman. And so I think, growing up, a lot of the just influence that I had from my parents, where I grew up in the city, and the people that I, was around on a consistent basis really kind of shaped me into who I am today. And really the community involvement and the stewardship of serving others around you is just something that, obviously has been ingrained into me. And I think, moving to Chicago in 2012, something that was always very important to me was, loving on my city and getting to know people in the community. And so being able to, volunteer, find different nonprofit organizations that speak to my values and the things that I want to do in the world definitely has been, sort of the personal journey or development that I've done outside of sort of that work day to day that I think has also impacted my ability to move into this role here at Medix.
That definitely makes sense. And I appreciate you sharing that context and kind of that foundation for kind of your why as well. Everybody's motivation and why is different too. And I think that also speaks to where folks are in their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, where companies are. Each organization has different DEI goals around kind of what they want to impact and where they are as well. What are some of the kind of key pillars or North Star of Medix's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy right now?
Yeah, I think to keep it as simple as possible, because obviously diversity, equity, and inclusion all mean so many different things, and it's such a large topic. It's so important. The three key pillars that I center myself around, and that Medix focuses on, basically every single day when it comes to the whole entire employee life cycle, is really internal recruitment, internal hiring. Like, what are we doing from a hiring perspective? How are we bringing individuals into our organization? And then sort of that middle piece of professional development, leadership development. What are we doing to ensure that there's a sense of not only belonging, but also continuous growth and development for all of our employees from an equal and equitable perspective? And then lastly, really around retention. So, focusing around what are the things that keep people here, that make employees happy, that people want to spend their time working here day in and day out, year over year, and really assessing, if there are things from a retention perspective that we can learn or that we can do better on, actually doing something with the feedback that we might hear from employees that have moved on. So those are the three key pillars that we try to center around on any given day.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to have those key pillars, what kind of buckets you're working towards as well. and thinking about the entire candidate and employee experience, those different moments. And then when somebody becomes an alumni of the organization as well, thinking about it from that holistic employer brand perspective. I know kind of one of the things that we wanted to touch on kind of specifically in terms of the how was, employee impact groups. What role do they really play in diversity, equity, and inclusion? And also, I think it's important to also know what we don't mean by that as well. So what role they don't play. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think for many organizations, these are known as employee resource groups or business resource groups, right? ERGs, BRGs is the common term that I hear. And the biggest thing about Medix and our company that we talk about every single day is about impact, right? So we coined them our impact groups, our DEI impact groups here at Medix. And I think when it comes to what role do our impact groups play, I think one of the proudest moments that I have of the last year of being in this role now is seeing how they've evolved, right? I think when we first initially created these groups, it was truly just on the foundation of creating a safe space for yourself and for others who identify like you, and where you can really get to know one another and know that there are others that are going through potentially the same things as yourself, even if you don't necessarily sit in the exact same physical location as them. So I think that's really how it began, was just wanting to create continuous, networking and community. And I think over the course of the last year, what it's evolved to be has been so much greater, right? The safe space is obviously sort of going back to that North Star that you mentioned. That is what it's needed to be and is going to continue to be for each of our impact groups. And I think what it's grown into has been much more vast. So, what role do they play? Professional development has been a huge part of it, right? I've had plenty of qualitative data that we've gathered from a lot of our employees that are in these groups who have said, I don't know if I would, still be here or be as successful if it wasn't for, being a part of Unidos, which is our Hispanic and Latinx impact group, for example, right? Not only being able to find a group that you meet with on a monthly basis that you can just like let off a little bit of steam and get to know people, but also finding mentors within these groups, right? Hey, I saw that you achieved this, result or accomplishment. Can I pick your brain and understand how you achieved that, right? And then, ultimately the mentorship, the mentees that have come from it too, right? Some people really want a little bit more of that sort of leadership angle. So being able to be someone's sort of go-to, if you will, that happened naturally, I think has been really wonderful. A couple of the other things, I think really allowing these groups to release their creativity, right? And talk about identity, right? We do a DEI newsletter for our whole entire company every other month. And it's really around education, right? So not only the education of, statistically speaking, how many people are in, these types of jobs in this type of industry, but education around fun things like pop culture, right? Education around big holidays and observances that might not get as much focus. So I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I think what it has become has been a really awesome opportunity for all of us from a professional development perspective, a retention perspective, and just, really being able to link up and support one another, networking across the organization as well.
Yeah, that support through community, through mentorship, education, programming is really critical to creating those kind of moments of connection and opportunity to connect with one another as well, learn from each other, and create those relationships across the organization with people you might not have met otherwise too. And I think a lot of folks are talking about, their employee resource groups or, business resource groups as well, kind of their role within the organization. Some folks look to this to say, okay, we have these ERGs or we have these groups, we have a counselor committee, this is the kind of data presented. How do we know we are doing an overall good job with our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, and knowing there's no silver bullet or right or wrong answer here and the work is continuous? What is your kind of philosophy around measuring these goals and initiatives, knowing that, we're not looking to check a box, but what gets measured gets ultimately invested in?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the $1 million question. I've thought a ton about this probably every day. Because to your point, there is no silver bullet. There is no use in, checking a box, right? And so I think the couple things that come to mind from like a KPIs and measurable perspective, I actually recently last week was at a conference called SHRM Inclusion in San Diego, and there were just some absolutely amazing speakers and sessions all around the meaning of this work while still tying it back to bottom line impact, ROI. Like how does this work truly impact your bottom line, right? And I think, when it comes to one of the things that I learned that I'm consistently thinking about this last week is we hear diversity, and diversity is the numbers, right? But when we just hear diversity and we don't think about the equity or the inclusivity piece, the diversity stuff can be measured very easily. You can, slap a percentage out there of a goal and where you want to be, and it's important to push for that. But if we do not have the foundation of inclusion as our first and foremost priority, there's no like winning when it comes to just like talking about numbers for numbers sake, right? So I think for KPIs and measurables, the way I like to break it down is on a quarterly basis and meeting with the team that I work with to say, here's a focus for me this quarter, and I think for our organization, right? Like we know that it all has to tie back to either our hiring goals, our development goals, and our retention goals. So for example, this quarter, I have a, KPI or a measurable to do some focus group conversations with our parents at Medix and understand how their experience is and what are the things that they want to learn more about or suggest or gain feedback on, right? So that's just one example. I'm not answering the question super directly because I think each organization needs to start by looking at where are you from a like DEI maturity perspective? And then also what are the gaps when it does come to underrepresented groups? For us, that's going to look completely different than it will at a different organization, maybe one that's 20 people or one that's 50,000 people, right? We're a mid-sized company. So our potential gaps are going to be needing to be assessed a little bit differently because of the makeup of our company.
Right. In order to know where you're going or where you would like to go ideally in the future, you have to know where you've been in the past one, and also what your foundation is to start as well, benchmarking that year over year, thinking about what are the areas of impact that you can create as well. We've talked about kind of the three different pillars as you were talking about too in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Medix. Are there any kind of points in the employee life cycle that you think are ever overlooked? And if so, what are they or what is it?
I think that I do. Yeah. And I think this is more so just based on a lot of networking and conversations that I've had with DEI practitioners across the board. So I am not saying this just in particular to Medix and my company, but I think that it goes back to what I just said, right? Like the diversity is about the numbers. And so people can set pretty clear goals, so to speak, when it comes to, we want to be X% more diverse from a gender perspective or an age perspective or a race perspective. But I think what ends up happening or that gets overlooked is, okay, let's say we, hire some incredible people to diversify our workforce. But I think the piece that sometimes gets overlooked or missed or forgotten about is then what, right? So that sort of professional development, career planning, situational leadership for once we do, and we meaning anyone, in the DEI space across any type of company, have the platform and foundation to be able to set everyone up for success and what that means to them individually. Because what I might be shooting for when I'm joining an organization might be completely different than the other 5 people that were hired at the exact same time. And how am I able to make sure that my voice is heard or my goals are acted upon just as much? So I think sometimes that middle part is like, well, we've got, we've hired people, let's like let them do their thing, or let's see how they operate, or whatever it might be. But if there isn't that really conscious effort around the inclusive nature of your team and the equitable opportunity for growth, you end up then having to assess and think about the retention and turnover piece too.
Absolutely. You have to think about each kind of step in their career too, in folks' careers, and have that open-ended conversation. My career goals are probably different than your career goals, or different than someone who just joined a company or someone who's been there for 2 or 3 years too, which does lead to kind of a next question around how are kind of leaders really authentically investing in that professional development and growth of the Medix team, knowing that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach for where folks want to go.
Yeah, I think a number of things. The pandemic has taught us a lot, and everyone functions very differently. I mean, something as simple, right? I'm air quoting right now, but as simple as like just internet accessibility and how people's internet functions might seem very, very basic and simple, but leaders have now had to think about that in ways they never did before. If everybody is having to work remote for, a certain amount of time, everyone's situation at home is very different. So for someone, it might be, hey, I have 6 roommates that are all working from home too, and we're all using the internet, or I might have kids at home, or whatever it might be, or work from home is all I've ever yearned for, and this is a perfect situation for me. Like, even something that simple has put leaders in a position to have to adapt and really think about the individual, and it's really hard to say like a blanket statement because everyone's going through something a little bit different. So I think that piece is something that comes to mind for me, and I think how leaders are investing in the professional development and growth of the Medix team, a lot of it just comes down to fundamentals of our business. So I think, ultimately we are a recruiting company. So our main goal is to positively impact lives. That is our purpose. So we need to do that internally first so that we can then do that for the talent, the job seekers, and the clients, right? The customers that we are serving. And I think that's just been a really big piece that leaders have had to continuously develop themselves within.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also important to remember and have those conversations with your leaders, knowing that goals can change over time as well, just like people do. And I think when we're talking about all of these, kind of the how of the strategy around company culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we're thinking about retention, a lot of folks have kind of redefined what it means to have an engaged employee or a team member as well. We know it's not just like clicks on a screen or how much you're slacking, things like that. How have you redefined what employee engagement really is since the pandemic started in 2020?
Yeah, from my role and where I sit, one of the main things I think has been thinking about our impact groups or our ERGs. So from an engagement perspective, like, are we continuing to grow from a membership perspective, right? Are there people that are excited to join our different impact groups, that are wanting to commit to supporting one another and connecting with one another on a monthly basis? I think that's one way to assess employee engagement. We also do several surveys and sentiment surveys, if you will, for our organization, where we ask, how are people feeling right now, right? And trying to really deduce from the results that we get, number one, how many people are taking the survey in the first place, and then what are we doing when we do see the results? Is there action plans that we can put into place? And I think one of the things that I don't claim to own this, right? This is something that Medix did a very good job of, but for an example of that, of employee engagement and how are we really listening to our employees, during the pandemic. Not only physical health was something that was obviously a major concern for many people, but mental health as a major concern. And so one thing that, we sent out one of these surveys and got a lot of feedback around mental health. And so, Medix made the decision to provide our teammates some free mental health days. And that was a direct correlation to if people weren't engaged enough to even fill out the survey and be honest and share, like, man, mental health right now is crazy. We're all locked in our houses and stuff like that. We wouldn't have ever known that that was a really big, important action that we could have taken on behalf of our employees to keep them that much more engaged, because all the data out there shows the more time people do have to rest and recharge and take care of themselves, the better that they are going to perform in the jobs that they're doing when they're there and fully locked in. So that's one example.
The gift of time. I think that is a really good example, especially as we are, thinking about entering a new year too, taking that time to reflect, reset, and make sure you're baking into your day-to-day and kind of non-negotiables for a great place to work too. I think we've talked a little bit about kind of where Medix is today, but definitely want to ask in terms of the organization equity journey, including the employees, leaders, and things like that right now. How would you describe kind of where the team is, and where would you like to be, let's say, a year from now, knowing that nobody has a crystal ball?
Yeah, the crystal ball piece I wish I had one. That'd be awesome. I think we as a company have evolved a ton from an equity perspective. We have created a, internal job board. We have the ability to make sure that we are opening all of our job opportunities for those who are interested or qualified to be able to, apply and interview, and, may the right person for the role, end up getting that, said promotion. So I think that's one main piece. And just, we've had a lot of conversations around, like, what is the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, and how do we teach our employees, especially, over the course of the last 2 years where there's been a lot more remote work, like, to advocate for themselves, to identify a mentor, to get your name out there, right? Because while we can build the processes and systems to be as equitable as we possibly can from, like, a policy and process perspective, there's also lots of importance around making sure that you are stating your goals and you're talking to people who have your back in important conversations. And that's just true of anywhere, right? So I would say we're in a good spot there. And I think, a year from now, it's really hard to quote, exactly where I think we should be from an equity perspective. I'm really interested to see, the new laws that have passed in New York and California from a pay equity and transparency perspective, kind of how that impacts just the workforce in general. So that's something that is on my mind, but I'm struggling to be able to quote exactly what I think is going to look like from an equity perspective a year from now.
Yes, as a New York resident, I'm also interested to see kind of how these laws, and also just kind of the future of pay equity and compensation, total compensation and rewards kind of evolves over the next few years as well. Cordelia asked a lot of specific questions around your journey to this work, what you're doing at Medix, what you're most excited by. Is there anything that I didn't ask you directly that you want to share with folks listening, or kind of double click on any kind of key takeaways you hope people bring with them?
I think in my head, one key takeaway that I would hope people to, bring with them is just the amount that I have learned by just finding other people that are in a similar role to me at other organizations has been invaluable. And so being able to, find partners on LinkedIn or networking groups, or maybe conferences or events that you can go to, or certification program, being able to lean on different DEI practitioners, and just say, like, hey, how did you set this up? It's not like I have yet to speak to somebody in a role like this that has been like, we are keeping this as a secret sauce and I'm not going to share it with anybody because we've got it figured out, right? There's no silver bullet. And so just being able to connect with one another and share information, and hey, here's how I overcame that, or here's some really cool things we're doing at my organization. I would just encourage, anyone listening to find those people in your network, industry specific or not, to be able to lean on and create those real relationships and friendships with, because I think it will go a really long way. But no, other than that, I think I covered most of it.
create those relationships. We're not alone doing this work, crowdsource, really talk to each other. And, I think that is a good kind of key takeaway and also kind of summary to end our interview on. Cordelia, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.